cut off at the end, but after we were off camera, you mentioned something about pulling out a phone book in Austin when you got to the hotel. What was that about?
Well, I think that was about the farthest I'd ever been away from home. I checked in at the hotel. I imagine I must have been out for dinner, but I don't remember anything about that. But then I went out to my hotel room, and I was alone. I mean, I didn't know anybody, not even the people I was going to be served with. I was going to be serving with. I hadn't been out to Bergford Field yet. I don't know what induced me to do it, but I picked up a telephone book, which was not very big. The whole town of Austin, I didn't know it then, but I learned subsequently was about 40,000 people. And the phone book itself was about the size of the South Orange phone book at home. And so I thumbed through it to see if I could find any Jewish names, people that I don't know what the reason was. Obviously, it wasn't to meet whatever Jewish people there were, at least not then. But just curious to see how many of my compatriots lived the most.
And do you remember how many you found in the phone book that you at least
I probably found a few, but not very many. I learned subsequently that Austin had only 100 Jewish families. And also learned subsequently that there were 2 synagogues.
And this is 42, 43?
This was early 1944, I guess.
Oh, okay. And the air base in Austin, is it Bergstrom with a G? Or
it's Swedish. Bergstrom. Bergstrom.
And overall, how long were you stationed at that base, which you described as sort of a transitional
It wasn't transitional for me, but the
Oh.
base was for transitional training for the student pilots, or the pilot students, whatever they were called. It wasn't, so far as I was concerned, that was a permanent assignment, unless I were to be transferred to go someplace else. As I mentioned yesterday, the mission of the base was to train pilots to be able to fly what were called then in the military C-47s, the C standing for Cargo 47. But the cargo were men, were people. And the base was part of what was then called the Troop Carrier Command, whose mission was to fly paratroopers on military missions. So that was the mission of the base.
And how long overall were you at that stationed at that base?
How many people?
No, how long? How many months or?
Oh, as it turned out to be, not very long.
And were you? Well, tell me. I mean, how long roughly were you there before you moved on to your next assignment?
3 or 4 months. 4 months, maybe.
And during the few months that you were there, what were you doing? Were you doing weather forecasting?
I was doing weather forecasting. The weather office, the weather station there had quite a few people. I don't know, weather forecasting now, I'm sure, is a lot different than it was then. enlisted people. Among the enlisted people were females, blacks, women Army Corps. The women mainly did plotting on maps. I'd have to get into some of the technical features of how weather forecasting was done now. But by that, the women would read the weather data as it came in on teletypes, as I recall, and plot it on large maps of the United States and parts of Canada and the Caribbean. And they would plot, for example, for Oklahoma City, what the temperature was at a given time, And I think they plotted, maps were plotted every 6 hours, I think. I can't remember, every 4 or 6 hours. And you would plot temperature, air pressure, wind speed, wind direction, I forget all the other elements, humidity. And they would, in very small handwriting, plot that data on every location on the map for which they had a report. It was the job then of the weather officer to turn that into a synoptic map by drawing lines through places that had cities that had the same air pressure and what have you. And you would, and doing that, that would create a weather map, a synoptic map was called. And from there, you could see what the weather trends were and what that you based. I'm simplifying it, but that was the principal basis upon which you made a forecast.
And who were the primary end users of the forecast that you were making? Is it pilots, control towers?
Well, it was an air base.
Yeah.
Airplanes were flown out of there. They had to know what the weather was. They had to know if there was going to be a. I remember vividly, an officer came in. I was on night duty. I forget his rank. I think it was a major. He was flying from Austin, I think, to Salinas, Missouri. And he came in for an in-flight forecast, that is, a forecast which would tell him what the weather, what he could anticipate to be the weather at every point along his trip until he got to Salinas. I remember that because the next day or 2 days later it came in and he said that the forecast was right on the button. It was not a hard forecast at that time.
And was that usually how it works, that the forecast was something communicated directly from the weather officers to the pilots, as opposed to?
Well, no, you had a weather forecast for the base as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what the weather would be expected to be 6 hours from now, 12 hours from now, 24 hours from now, 2 days from now. That would be a base for a forecast, a local forecast. Then for the missions, for the pilots who were actually going to be flying someplace, there was a forecast for what they could expect along the trip, along the flight. I don't remember how the forecast was handled for the pilot training for the student pilots. I don't even remember. Well, I do remember we had to make okay. I went on a mission, a practice mission. There were a lot of planes involved. And I practice mission at night over the Gulf of Mexico. And my recollection is I made the forecast for that flight. I'm not sure about it.
And so you were at Bergstrom for 3 or 4 months, then where'd you go?
Then I received, well, you're leaving out my experience there because my experience at Bergstrom, while I was stationed there, was very important to me personally.
Okay.
There were quite a few weather officers there. The officer in charge was a first lieutenant, all the other officers were second lieutenants. No, Horn was a first lieutenant. Actually, the weather station was overstaffed. We had more weather officers than we needed. I don't know how many there were, but quite a few. And I remember some of the names. Horn, Don Horn from Indiana, Dan Buckley, I think. He was from Indiana. I'll get to them in a minute. And there were a number of other officers. But before we get to that, I think I mentioned yesterday that the base officers, as distinguished from the pilot officers, had to live in town. And so I had to find a place to live in. It was one of the first things I had to do after having reported for duty. And I found Austin is the state capital of Texas, and it's also where the University of Texas is located. The main business of Austin is state government and the University of Texas, at least it was then. And I found a place to live, and also most of the students at the University of Texas, at least then, lived either in fraternity or fraternity houses and sorority houses, University of Texas was co-ed, or in private houses. There was very little housing for the students provided by the universities, I remember. There maybe was one dormitory for women. I'm not sure that I really didn't know that much about it. But anyway, I found housing in a private house very close to the campus. The campus is located geographically behind the state capitol building itself. And it so happens, and this is an experience I'll never forget, I had a room, and there were a couple of rooms. The house itself, where I lived, was behind a residence where a family lived. And it was sort of like I forget what you call it. It was an adjacent building behind the main residence. It was on private street. And I had a room, and opposite my room, it turned out that Horn and Buckley also lived. And it was a couple of, and so I met them, of course, very, very early. They were in the weather station with me. One of the officers in the weather station, one of the weathermen was a fellow by the name of Light, Lieutenant Light. I don't remember his first name. I didn't know him very well. But one day I had the door to my room open, and Buckley and Horn had the door to their room open, and they were talking between themselves, and they were talking referring to Light, Lieutenant Light. He referred to him as a kike. And they saw me in my room and they went, "Hi, Cy." They didn't know that I was Jewish. I assumed I was not. Else they would not have said what they were saying. But it was the second experience in my life where I overtly confronted anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism wasn't directed to me, but they were two fellows were referring to Lieutenant Light as a kike. It so happens that a day or two after that, Lieutenant Light, who, as I say, I didn't know very well, came to me and he said, and I guess Light assumed that I was Jewish. He said to me, "There's a Jewish family in Austin who feel it's their patriotic duty to rent a room to a Jewish officer who needed one, and would I be interested?" And they told me the name of the people and so forth. Well, where I was kind of lonely, and I thought that was a good idea, and so I went to see the people. Their name was Fickenbaum, middle-aged Jewish couple. They lived on a very nice street, in a very nice house. And it so happens they had a son, they had a single child, a son who was off in the military, in the Navy, I think, someplace. And they offered to rent to me the room that had been his room in the house. Everything was on one floor. It wasn't a ranch house, but it was not a big house, and all the rooms were on one floor. As I recall, $5 a week.
And how long after you had moved into the apartment in Austin, how long were you there before you moved to
Maybe
the
a
then?
week. 10 days. And they were wonderful people. They were very nice. Anyway, and I guess sometime after that, Warren and Buckley must have realized that I was Jewish. Never had any problems. I mean, they did a good job. But we were, the weather station was overstaffed. They had more weather officers than we needed, actually, which meant that I think I worked 3 days on, maybe one or 2 days off, in shifts. Day shift, which was started at 8 o'clock and 8 to 4. The night shift was 4 to midnight, as I recall. And then the midnight shift from midnight to 8 in the morning. There were buses that went from town to. You have to realize that you wouldn't, when we were in Austin, your mother and I, for Molly's wedding, the city is much bigger than it was then. More buildings, a couple of skyscrapers. You had no skyscrapers when I was there. And the city, the sidewalks were filled with men in uniform. Now this is wartime. There were dozens of military bases dozens and dozens throughout Texas and all over the country. And around Austin, there must have been a dozen bases. There was, I can't remember all the names of them. There were air bases, there were Army infantry bases. And any time of the week, particularly on the weekend, the sidewalks were full of men in uniform. No way to really describe it. When we were in Texas a couple of weeks, when we were from Ollie's, the streets seemed to be empty. But the streets were not empty at that time. There were soldiers all over the place. It's hard to imagine that. It would be hard to imagine, for example, living here in Philadelphia, and all you saw on the sidewalks were people in uniform. Okay. And so that's, I guess,
Let me ask you a question. You said when the guys across the hall referred to Lieutenant Light as a kike, that was the second time you had confronted over anti-Semitism. What was the first time?
The first time was my freshman year at Columbia, in the first semester. It was a Sunday night. I lived in a suite of rooms with a roommate. My roommate was Bill Abel, William Abel III from Atlanta, and myself. It was a Sunday night, and my room was the outer room. And on Sunday night, there was a fellow who lived on our floor in Hartley Hall by the name of Lauren Guy, G-U-I, Lauren Guy. And he stopped by, he knocked on the door, I said, come on in, and he came in, and he asked me if I wanted to go out for a beer. I was in the middle of studying, probably reading a book for the humanities course. And I said, I still had some work to do. And he said, well, he says, what are you trying to do? You're trying to make Phi Beta Kappa? I said, no, but it would be nice if I did. He says, don't try. He says, the Jew boys around here have that set up. And he went on. He said, nothing bothered me more than to see a Jewish fellow walking across the campus with a good-looking girl under his arm. I sort of looked up in amazement. And I said, Lauren, I'm Jewish, just like him. Lauren Guy was about 6'4". He shriveled up to about 5'4". And he apologized. He said, I'm sorry. And he closed the door and left. He came back 20 minutes ago. And he said, sorry, I'm really sorry. That was that. Now, Lauren Guy came from a very small town, way upstate New York, probably somewhere close to Canada. He probably never even knew any Jewish people. He came from, I think, Afton, New York. Well, Lauren, he never became a good friend of mine, but we were on very good terms. I think he showed up at one of our reunions at Horton House. He was glad to see me, and I was glad to see him. But I think he came to know a lot of Jewish fellows in our freshman class. And I think Lauren after that was not an anti-Semite. That was the first one. So those So there were two experiences, in both of which the people that expressed anti-Semitic feelings did not know I was Jewish. Had they known I was Jewish, they would have said what they said.
And the second time when you were at the apartment house in Austin?
It was not an apartment house.
Or
It was not an apartment, it was a cottage. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know if there were any apartment houses in Austin. There probably were small ones. Anyway.
So the guys across the hall from you, though, and you said a few minutes ago that at some point afterwards they learned that you were Jewish.
Well, they had to.
Okay.
I didn't tell them. There was nothing. When that incident happened, they just said, they saw me across the hall in my room and said, "Hi, Cy," and that was it. There was no conversation. I didn't go up to them and say, "I'm Jewish." I didn't say anything. I might have closed the door to my room. But as time went on, they must have learned that I was Jewish. I assume they did. I don't know if they did or they didn't.
Was there anything else significant or meaningful about your time at Bergstrom before you moved on from there?
Oh yeah, well, I began to meet girls who were students at the University of Texas. I met a girl that I liked a lot, who was a Jewish girl from Mercedes, Texas. Mercedes, Texas was then probably something like a shtetl along the Rio Grande River, way down in the south of Texas. And her family were probably the only Jewish family in Mercedes, Texas. And I met a number of, my social life, such as it was based upon meeting girls who were students at the University of Texas.
Would you say your social life was more active and vibrant when you were in the military in Austin, or during your first year and a half or so at college?
It's hard to compare. It's different. I had, because the weather station at Bergstrom Field was overstaffed, I really had, I think it was, I can't remember, it was 3 days on duty, 2 days off, or 1 day off. But either way, I had a lot of free time. And sometimes I would make a date to go swimming at Barton Springs. Barton Springs was a swimming place which was lovely. It was, got there by bus. Most of the time I went to Barton Springs quite a number of times. Once with a girl by the name of Vivian G. Jans. She was from Corpus Christi, Texas. A Jewish girl. And most of my trips to Barton Springs was with a girl by the name of Nikki Nibbenzall. She was from Mercedes, Texas. Very nice girl. She was journalism. She was then a sophomore or something.
When you dated at this time, was it important to you that they were dating Jewish girls?
No. So happens as the girls I was meeting. Well, I had some dates with girls, at least one whose name I can't, oh, I remember her first name. It was not Jewish. Her name was, I would call it Beatrice, but she called her name Beatrice. Texas girl. Probably had one or two of those. But I remember that, Beatrice. The Fichtenbaums, the husband was Morris Fichtenbaum. They were Texans. His wife, I've forgotten her first name, but to me they were Mr. Fichtenbaum and Mrs. Fichtenbaum. I can't remember her first name. There were times when they invited me to have dinner with them. But most of the times I had dinner myself. The food at the officers' mess at Bergstrom was terrible. So I'd have lunch there, and sometimes breakfast. But suppers, dinners I would have in town, either at the Stephen Austin Hotel or the Driscoll Hotel. The Driscoll Hotel was a very old hotel, and as I learned later, just before I left Texas, that was considered a better hotel, better than the Stephen Austin, although they were only a block apart. The Stephen Austin Hotel was a famous, important hotel politically, as a matter of fact. The members of the Texas legislature, Texas was a big state. When the legislature was in session, the members of the legislature stayed in town, and they could go back, travel 500 miles or 800 miles to El Paso, or wherever they came from. And that's where Lyndon Johnson did his politicking when he was active in state politics. That was the center of the, and at that time, politics meant the Democratic Party. Texas has since that time has become Republican, but Texas was a Democratic state at the time.
Were the Fichtenbaums religiously observant? Did they have?
They belonged to our synagogue. They belonged to of the two synagogues. They belonged to the Reform Temple. I went to them once or twice with them to services. They were. I would say they were sort of observant Jews. They weren't terribly religious, I don't think, but they were observant Jews. Morris Fichtenbaum had a brother who I never met, who happened to be treasurer of the University of Texas. And they were very active in the JWB in Austin, the Jewish Welfare Board, which had its place of meeting in the basement of their synagogue. I've got the name of the synagogue, but it was Reform Temple. And on a Saturday night or a Saturday and Sunday, the basement, very nice basement, was filled with soldiers at the Jewish Welfare Board, which served Jewish people, Jewish men who were in the military, in all of the, as I just said, there were a lot of military bases around Austin, Texas. Some of them do. Fort Hood, for example, still is there. That's where that trial is going on now, this Muslim psychiatrist who killed a lot of people. Fort Hood was a very big place. It was north of Austin. As I recall, from North Fort Hood to South Hood was 80 miles. It's a pretty big base. There was Camp Swift, there was San Marcos, which was an air base. There was, can't remember all the names.
So was there anything that we haven't talked about from your time at Bergstrom Air Force Base that you viewed as significant? Or have we sort of covered that period?
That was pretty much covered. I was very fond of this Vicki Nebenzahl, but I didn't really get to know her terribly well because I wasn't there that long. As a matter of fact, I didn't get to meet her until quite late of my tour in Austin, Texas. This is I told you that going to Austin, Texas, I took the train to the New York Central when that Cyril Silverman got on the train in Syracuse. He was at an air base somewhere in East Texas. Texas is so big, there's East Texas, West Texas, North Texas. And he came to visit me, and I'll tell you another story about him later. And he stayed with me at in my room at the Victor Babs. He came on the weekend. And somehow he knew some people at the fraternity, at the sorority, SDT, Sigma Delta Tau, SDT. It's a national Jewish sorority. And I don't know how he made a telephone call or something, and he and I went over one afternoon to the SDT sorority house, and there were a lot of girls that were sort of sitting out on the front lawn. Nice fraternity house. So actually it was a fraternity house. It was the fraternity house of the Sami fraternity. But all the members of Sami were off at the war someplace else, and so it had been taken over, at least for the duration of the war, by the SDT sorority, and they occupied the Sami house. We're sitting around reclining on the lawn, on the front lawn. It's a very nice place. And this girl, Vicki, her name was Mildred, Vicki Nebenzahl, asked me how old I was. And I said I was 21, but I wasn't 21. I had just become 20, as I recall. And I said, 21. She said, you're not 21. She was right. I said, oh, yes, I am.
Why'd you say you were 21 when you weren't?
I don't know. There's no reason. I guess it seemed that I don't know. But I
it's not like today when the drinking age is 21.
Right.
Right?
No, that's right. That wasn't the reason. I guess to give the impression I was more mature than I probably really looked.
It's sort of funny at that age, 1 year seems to make a big difference.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, I was a second lieutenant. Pretty young to be an officer. I think I was 20. Well, anyway. Eventually I just remember, just one was I got orders to someplace in Flushing, Long Island. And learned that I was being assigned to the Air Transport Command. And because the Army Air Corps realized they really had more weather officers than they needed, I was sent to Flushing to receive training in air traffic control. And that happened to be the training center for air traffic controllers for the, I guess it was then also the Civil Aeronautics Authority. And that was and during that period, we were billeted at a hotel in Manhattan, not far from the Columbia campus, as a matter of fact. It was at 91st Street and Broadway, the Greystone Hotel. And the military had taken over a number of rooms in that hotel. And so every day I would take the subway from, I know I had to go down to 42nd Street and then I'd take a subway from 42nd Street. I wouldn't be able to do it, I wouldn't know how to do it now. But to go to, it was Flushing. I did that every day for several weeks.
Did you know when you received when you were in Austin and you received your orders to go to report to Flushing? Did you know that you were going to be trained in air traffic control?
No.
You were just told you're shipping out.
When you get orders, I don't know if you've ever seen military orders. I don't know. I don't know if they're the same now as they used to be. But it was a lot of abbreviations and double talk. It'd be hard to decipher if you read a military order. But if you saw your name, you recognize your name. And the order would say, Lieutenant Cyrus J. Bloom, serial number, so forth, to report to a certain place at a certain date. There might be 100 other names on that same order to go to different places, but
And were there in fact other weather officers from your base in Austin who were shipping out to Flushing at the same time, or was it just you?
Not from Berkeley Field. I don't know if there were any others, but there were other officers that I ran into there who had been in aviation cadet training with me, in my class at NYU. One was a fellow by Bill Levin from Pittsburgh, no, from Erie, Pennsylvania. Burley Bill. He became a partner in K-Show much later.
So Dad, so we have a few minutes left on this tape, and what I'd like to do actually is we'll come back and go through the experiences, but I want to sort of tick off your sort of movement through the military. So you were at Bergstrom for about 3 or 4 months. Then you were in Flushing. How long were you there?
A couple of weeks.
A couple of weeks. Okay. And where'd you go from there?
Then I got orders from the airmen overseas. This was funny. How much time do you have?
5 minutes.
Okay. was given leave of about 2 weeks, and I was given orders under seal. They were secret orders. I mean, this is wartime. And I was given 2 weeks, and then I was to report to Washington, D.C. I forgotten where, but to some headquarters in Washington, D.C. And I was to get an airplane in Washington, D.C. And turned out that the secret orders were to send me to Great Britain. We took off from, I was in Washington. I stayed at the Annapolis hotels, I remember. There was an air base, I forgot what the name of it was at the time. It's now National Airport. It's Reagan Airport, but I forgot what it was. It was a military airport at the time. But in any event, after a couple of false alarms, I got on an airplane. And I guess by then I knew where we were going, I'm not sure. But we took off one night in a DC-4. This is before jet engines. There were no jet engines. It was a DC-4, C-54. And we took off, and I think it was we took off at night, or in the middle of the night, and we landed after about 7, 8, 9 hours in a desolate place called Goose Bay, Labrador. Labrador has been built up a lot since then, but this was wilderness. It was wilderness. You looked out after that, the airplane, at the window of the airplane, you looked down over Labrador, and all you saw was woods, and forest. And then we landed at the military United States Air Force Base at Goose Bay, Labrador, and it was like a gem in the middle of a wilderness.
Did you, by the way, you said these were secret orders. When did you learn that your secret orders were to fly to Great Britain? Did you know before you got on the plane that's where you were going?
Not sure if I knew before I got on the plane.
And I'm just curious. I mean, if the orders typically are just, Cyrus Bloom is being sent to Great Britain. I mean,
I didn't know that. The orders I carried were under seal.
So now, looking back on it, I mean,
that was good duty.
Yeah. What was the reason for an order like that being under seal? Do you know now?
Oh, this is wartime. I don't know why it would be under seal, but a lot of what you did was secret. This is wartime.
But I'm hearing you, and what was under seal, what was in the sealed envelope was Lieutenant Cyrus Bloom is going to Great Britain.
I don't know I don't know if I ever actually saw the orders.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I actually saw the orders. But this is interesting. We landed in Goose Bay, Labrador, and the plane had to refuel.
You know what, Dad? The camera's going to cut off, so let's pick up next time when you landed at